Hello again, everyone. Well, we just finished our first networking session. There were a lot of people out there getting to know each other, connecting, discussing about their takeaways from the sessions. That was great, and was good to know some known faces and meet new people. I'm introducing here the second panel. It's the panel of Profit.co. It will be hosted and facilitated by Senthil, and it will be joined by Peter Kerr, and also from Ericsson, John Simon. This is a topic that is, I think, very interesting and is a bit the chicken and the egg, right? Some people say to change a company, we need to improve our capabilities, our people, and some others are we need to change the system. And probably that the answer is we need to do the two together. And that's what this session is about how do we blend technology and skills and people to increase and improve strategy execution. So I welcome here Senthil, who will facilitate this conversation. Hey, Senthil, good afternoon or good morning.
Hey, Eli, good afternoon. Exciting. Looks like it's been a great day so far. Right?
Amazing. I'm so looking forward to your conversation. So I will not take any more time, and we'll basically just leave you the stage so that you can bring us through that fascinating topic that is how do we blend people skills and technology. I wish you a very fruitful conversation.
Sure. Thank you very much, Eli. And folks, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are joining from. All of us are living in an incredible time, right, where every day we are hearing technological advances, particularly in AI. So we thought we could have a very timely session with two great panelists. Right? How technology and skills blend to empower better strategy execution. Right? So my name is Senthil. I am from Profit.co. Profit.co is a strategy execution platform helping customers worldwide to execute their strategy through AI strengthened technology. And we also do employee performance management and project and portfolio management. Now, let me introduce my two great panelists. We have John Simon joining us from Dallas. John had an incredible career. He is the head of people strategy and operations for Ericsson. He has a lot of experience in strategy execution, multiple frameworks, and has been practicing OKRs. They have scaled up to more than 1,000 plus users, and they've been practicing it for the past 5 years. He works very closely with their leadership, and I'm quite eager to hear from him. And more importantly, he's a hands-on practitioner on AI, and he shares a lot of incredible stuff in LinkedIn. And we have Peter joining us from UK. Peter has been doing OKR coaching and consulting for over 2 decades, brings in a lot of real-world experience, and he leads Earn the Right coaching, and he's an author too. Right. So welcome again, John and Peter. Really looking forward to the session today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Great. So with that, let's jump in straight. John, just to set the context, you've had a pretty fascinating journey across consulting, analytics, and transformation, right? And now AI-driven people strategy. Can you briefly share your role at Ericsson and how Ericsson's journey began for OKRs?
Definitely. First, it's an honor to be here. So I do work at Ericsson. We're headquartered in Sweden, but I'm actually based in Texas. So I lead strategy, AI, analytics, workforce planning for the Americas People unit. So we support about a little over 14,000 employees. So my OKR journey, I believe it has a funny origin. So it felt like yesterday. It was late 2018. Our North America CEO said in a meeting, we should use OKRs. And I nodded confidently, like I knew what he's talking about. I had no clue, never heard of the term OKR. But that night, I purchased John Doerr's book, Measure What Matters, and it just clicked. By 2020, I was leading our first strategy execution kickoff event using OKRs. I even brought our first playbook, physical playbook from that event. I was just reviewing the OKRs, and I'm like, wow, we've come a long way. So that's my journey.
That's great, John. So when you first started adopting OKRs in Ericsson, what was the problem that you were really trying to solve? John, can you elaborate?
Sure. So I'm sure everybody here has heard of Peter Drucker, the founder of Management by Objectives. He nailed it when he said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." But I'd add that execution eats them both for lunch. Now, Peter would probably disagree, but we weren't lacking strategy at Ericsson. We were lacking that execution discipline. OKRs gave us that superpower. But here's the thing, we didn't become the Avengers overnight. Year one, different teams were pulling us in different directions. Year two, we started to align versus just cascading. Year three, we really started to hit our strides. So each year we adopted more OKR principles, and each year our execution maturity grew. So I would say it's been an evolution, not a revolution.
It's great. So, John, coming into using technology for OKRs and strategy execution, you've been using technology, Profit.co in this case, for the past about 5 years, right? So, how has technology helped you with strategy execution? Right? Can you share your thoughts?
Yeah. So first, some of you have probably experienced my early OKR trauma. We were managing OKRs for all of North America in Excel and PowerPoint. So you can imagine cascading objectives across thousands of employees with chaos, too many emails to count. But then we were introduced to Profit.co. It was the easy button and we pushed it. I would say in three ways that really stood out to me. The first was visibility. It's very difficult to do that with PowerPoint and Excel, but with Profit.co, everyone could see what mattered most. Second, I would say was alignment, real linking across the units versus, again, that cascading. Third, it was the cadence. Check-ins became a habit with conversations and feedback built in. That's what gave OKRs their voice. It really transformed our OKRs into a living execution system.
Great. And so, John, can you also share any specific example in terms of using technology, particularly in terms of insights, and how do you present, let's say, to your executive leadership, also on things like check-ins, alignments, etc. Right? How do you really use technology in Ericsson, considering that there are thousands of people who are executing OKRs?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest changes for the executives is I stopped using PowerPoint. So that's one thing I encourage all the others that were owning and managing OKRs. I said, look, within Profit.co, that's where you should be presenting. Get people used to the interface and see the power of what this solution can do. So that really became the norm. I think a lot of people started getting away from PowerPoint and really using Profit. I think the other thing is just the check-ins. It just made it so much easier to track, provide feedback, even add recognition right there in the system. So it was definitely a game changer.
Okay, great. And folks, please keep your questions coming. Right? You can start typing your questions in the Q&A panel. And I already see a question from Alexander in the Q&A panel. Right? We will get to that very soon, right, between John and Peter. Right. So moving on, Peter, before I have a question for you, wanted to really follow through on the point which John mentioned, which is the usage of technology. And when I was talking to you, last week and even earlier this week, you had some thoughts on, the maximum number that people can, do OKRs without technology, right? So otherwise it becomes very unmanageable. Right? So any thoughts in terms of at what's the right point for people to think about using technology and when they should really go about it, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the tipping point becomes when you've gone beyond the executive team and the SLT, and you're going one level below. And I think in order to scale any sort of alignment, you need transparency. And tools like Excel don't really do it. And also, you've got no means of actually tracking usage. So it's very difficult to see if people are actually regularly checking in, if things are getting updated at the right time. So the thing for me, the technology is not just about what it's capturing. It's actually you as a leader trying to put OKRs in to check adoption, to see if it's landing. Because the thing is with technology, and particularly with AI now, you could write some beautiful OKRs that didn't do an absolute thing for your organization at all. So you've ticked a box. You've said, I've completed it. So I think it's about having a live, transparent way, but it fundamentally comes down to leadership and curiosity of leadership to stay involved and engaged. It can't be, I'm the chief exec that's read, measure what matters, now everybody else gets on with it. I think it needs much more connection. And I think that I would totally agree about the get PowerPoint and Excel out of your boardroom and, use something that's got live data in it. This isn't subjective. It's something that's there. It's real. So, yeah, for me, I think as soon as you've got a couple of teams that are trying to run quarterly cycles, you won't get the discipline and the cadence in without some sort of platform to help manage that.
Great. Yeah,
Hey,
that's
Senthil,
pretty helpful.
Senthil, I thought of one more example if I could share it. I got a
Sure.
story. So our CEO joined in 2017. So before we started using OKRs, and he immediately noticed something odd. We were using balanced scorecards and every KPI was green. He called it the watermelon effect. Green on the outside, you open it up and then it's red on the inside. And so this really changed with OKRs and profit. So now we see green, yellow, and red, and that's healthy. Red doesn't mean failure. It means executive intervention needed here. The algorithm within Profit.co makes it impossible to fake the progress. When a strategic OKR turns red, leaders know exactly where to remove barriers. So then transparency truly becomes our competitive advantage.
That's a great point, and I really love this analogy of watermelon, right, where everything seems green, right, from the outside, but when you dig deeper, then you start discovering, right? And what leaders really hate is getting bad news late, right? Everything looks green and rosy, and you at the end of the quarter you start seeing surprises. That's not something which people like, and I really like the very proactive approach that you have taken, John, right, in Ericsson, in terms of looking at things very clearly and very early ahead of time. There are a few questions. So before I move to Peter, right, John, I mean, if you're comfortable with taking, there's a first question by Alexander about the OKR incentivization system, right? Either we can talk now or we can finish a question with Peter and then come back. Yeah.
So what is the question, Senthil?
Yeah. So the question is, it's under the Q&A. Right? Please explain the OKR incentivization system across your hierarchy, right? Or companies that what are the best practices to have an aligned variable bonus system between directors that is validated by the board? What's the weighting top down to employees, right? So essentially, is there a linkage between OKR execution and, let's say, bonus, variable pay, whatever?
Yeah. So I use something that I call the business triangle. I won't go into too much detail, but I do got to explain it. So we have your performance goals. At one point, you have your business plan, which really drives your bonus structure and your sales incentives. And then you have OKRs. So all three have alignment. So of course, your performance goals and the business plan are going to drive most of the incentives, right? And the bonus structure. But the OKRs, that's really what's moving the company forward. That's really what's growing your revenue and achieving goals that nobody thought was even possible. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's directly our bonus structure tied to OKRs, but it definitely has an impact indirectly on your performance rating. And if you have a pay for performance system in place, obviously that's where you're going to really start to see the benefits of OKRs tied back to incentives.
Great. Thanks, John. There are a few more questions under Q&A. Right? I'll go to Peter for a moment and then we'll come back to the questions. Right? Thanks, folks, for the questions. So, Peter, you had probably a very long experience with OKR execution and with companies which are large and small. I wanted to ask something. You're talking about the approach of radical simplicity, right? Under what conditions does radical simplicity, right? For example, people having just 1 or 2 company level OKRs, right? They actually increase confidence, right? Rather than undermining the confidence. We are talking about the confidence of the board, right? And then I have a follow-up question on how leaders, know when technology is really helping them with, clarity rather than creating noise, right? But wanted to talk about your approaches in those scenarios, and you gave me a great example. Would love to hear that as well. Yeah.
Well, for me, I think it's what people can remember. I mean, ultimately, as leaders, you tell stories from the top, and you want those stories to light fires all the way through the organization to get people excited. So first off, a lot of it's about language. If all your OKRs look like they've been written by a lawyer or an accountant, they're not going to get that high level engagement. You want something that captures imagination and enthusiasm. You also got to capture the idea of transformation. So there are a lot of directive strategies out there, like saying AI is our #1 focus, which everybody's saying, right? But actually, what does that mean? How does that translate? And it's that point where, how can I ensure that I keep the customer's voice in the room? How can I make sure that, how do we use it? Because it doesn't mean stop doing everything else. It means do something that's going to help using AI to add value to our customers. Or how can it drive operational efficiency? And we're all, at the moment, still juggling where productivity's landed with AI, because we're kind of all using it to do lots of things, but exactly where's that extra time going and how are we using it? And I think these are the things as we become more sophisticated with technology that we'll realize. So I think simplicity at the top allows people to think about all these different tools and ways of achieving things in a much more simplistic way. And often with a lot of organizations, I might just start with 2 OKRs, one internal, one external. One that's highly customer focused and one that's really internally focused about a change that we need to make as an organization. But fundamentally, you've still got that, the idea of Drucker and strategy getting eaten by culture. You really do need to align it to behavioral change. If you want to achieve something different next year, just writing it down isn't going to do it. You've got to accept what went wrong the year before, learn from that, put yourself in that learning zone, and then drive something. So if you start layering in 9 different priorities as the leadership team, people just go, I don't know where to start. And I think you and I were discussing, and the technology, yes, plays a role, but for example, and I think we both weirdly had arrived at the same thing, getting a really powerful CRM system will not necessarily deliver the results you need for sales and marketing. And it's the same with an OKR platform. You've got to put the quality and the effort in. And I think there's always been a sort of probably a tension between OKR coaches and software companies, where you guys in the past probably wanted to sell seats, and we were all about how we could actually make it well. And I think now you've found a much more balanced approach, certainly from my dealings with you, that your clients have got to go through certain gateways before they can actually really go and unlock it. So you're much more aligned to actually delivering value than just selling seats.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. And I think definitely it's not a great approach to force feed technology right from the beginning, or premature scale up, right? So we have seen people who have started with 100, just 100 employees, gradually scale up to more than 1,000, and they've stayed for more than 5 years, right? So Ericsson is a great example. Now, before we move on to a very exciting conversation on AI adoption and agents, John, there is just one very interesting question from the audience, which I wanted to take, getting a lot of upvotes from Gustavo. The question is, how do OKRs survive the change in leadership? Have you gone through it, or do you have any real experience?
Gustavo, I owe you. This is I was afraid this tough question would come up. So I can tell you it really has been 2 steps forward and 1 step back when we have leadership change, especially at a higher level. So I remember with the first CEO that I was working with, I said, look, we got to stop cascading. We have to start aligning. We'll move much quicker. We'll be much more agile. And he looked at me and just shook his head and said no. So I was like, okay, I'm going to table that one. I'm going to bring that one back up. But then I brought it back up after a period of time, and it started to make sense to him. It's the same thing. We had a new CEO join over a year ago, and there's some principles that, he's kind of pushing back on. So again, we take a step forward, take a step back. It's that evolution. But great question, Gustavo. Thanks for putting me on the spot.
Yeah, that's a great question, Gustavo. And just to add a point there, what I've seen in a lot of customer situations is that one, the role of the OKR captain, right, on the program manager becomes very, very important, right? And they need to not only win the executive sponsor, but they also need to cultivate multiple allies, right, particularly in the second level. And the program, if are able to communicate and see the value for everybody, right, the second level, right, at every level, people see some value out of the OKR program. And when the leadership changes, right, it's not just you advocating for OKRs, but you have multiple people talking about how that's really truly helping them, right? So then we have a better chance, right? So with that, let's move on to a topic which interests a lot of people, John.
Mhm.
Ericsson is doing pioneering work, with AI, right? Specifically when HR and people strategy, which you are driving, right?
Yes.
What are your thoughts about where AI fits, right, vis-a-vis
Mhm.
human judgment, right, while driving strategy execution? What has been your experience so far?
So here's our North Star, the way that I would clearly communicate it, hopefully, and that is we want to be human led, we want to be AI amplified. If AI isn't in your OKRs, performance goals, and your development plans right now, you're already falling behind in the race. But here's what we've learned: AI should amplify human judgment, not replace it. We use AI to accelerate. I'm an AI accelerator. I lead the AI Accelerator Council, but anyone can be an AI accelerator within our companies. But humans stay in the driver's seat for strategy, judgment calls, and anything involving trust or empathy.
Great. Yeah. And folks, Peter is leading a series of workshops on using AI on OKR coaching. I'm sure many of you are familiar. I found it pretty useful. So, I just wanted to put that out there. Now, John, continuing, you and your team, you have deployed more than, I think, 30 AI agents, right? So can you talk a little bit about that, and how do you ensure that these AI agents are, tightly aligned to your strategic priorities, right?
Yeah.
So instead of being very independent initiatives, right? How do you really ensure that?
Yeah.
Love to hear your thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, it's simple. We made it an OKR. So we thought we set an aspirational goal of 5 AI agents for our unit, but within 1 week, we had 10. By year end, we had 30 plus. At the market level, we targeted 10 high impact use cases and delivered 70 plus. So here's what I learned and everyone underestimated: how easy it is to build AI solutions today. It's not like implementing an ERP or CRM system. The hard part: change management, data, knowledge, and measuring real impact. Anyone can spin up an agent. I could teach any one of you that hasn't done it before in 30 minutes, you could build your first agent. But making sure it aligns to your strategic priorities and delivering measurable value, that's the discipline OKRs can bring.
That's great. That's great. And John, just to continue on this conversation, right? As AI is really accelerating the strategy cycles even further, how do you see the relationship between OKRs, AI agents, and leadership skills evolving in the next couple of years, right? And what should leaders do to prepare in this context?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics right now. So everyone's racing to deploy AI use cases, especially agents, making them more and more autonomous over time. But here's what keeps me up at night. And it's going to separate the winners from the losers over the next 2 to 3 years. It's data quality, knowledge management, and ontology. If you haven't heard of ontology before, that's your homework assignment for me. Go read more about it, especially what Palantir is doing in this area. Nobody wants to do this unglamorous work. It's typically not, recognized. There's not a lot of awards for it, but it's foundational. The second critical area: building agentic operating models and capabilities, the skills, the structures, and the culture to work alongside AI. You can use OKRs for both. You can also, I recommend using your development goals, but my advice, start now, build your data foundations and those human capabilities that are irreplaceable in parallel, or your AI investments, they're not going to scale.
Great. So John, maybe a couple of questions from the audience. There are some relevant questions here. There's a question from Marga. When do you introduce tooling? Right at the start of your OKR journey, or is it a little later? Right. And it's also an implementation next to the change of implementing OKRs. Right. But I think the question is, when do you introduce tooling? That's the primary question.
Okay, introduce tooling for OKR specifically. So, Margaret, if you heard me earlier, I mentioned it as I really had that trauma because I was using just PowerPoint and Excel, and it just was unmanageable. Like I was definitely stressed about it and had lots of late nights trying to consolidate everything. So I knew I had no other choice but to introduce tooling. But I think we all know, especially when you're in a large global company or even smaller companies, technology's tough from a change management standpoint. But I really felt like Senthil and team with Profit.co, they really did bring the easy button. But I won't tell you it was like instantly day one success. It took time. Again, going back to what I said, it truly was an evolution over time, introducing some functionality this year and then more functionality the next year. We didn't just say, here you go, here's all the functionality. It just would have been overwhelming, I think.
Great, thanks. And probably one more question from Manish. Manish, many of your questions are product specific, which our team will reach out to you, but a short answer, whether Profit.co allows cross-functional team, our squad objective tracking, the answer is yes. And we can explain all of your other questions through maybe a one-on-one conversation, right? Definitely will do that. But thanks a lot for a lot of insightful questions there, Manish. Now, John, coming back, that's also an additional question on AI, right? So you have started with pilots, but now you have really moved beyond pilots to deploying AI agents at a meaningful scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you really choose? You may have a lot of problems, but how do you really choose which problems deserve an AI agent, right? Vis-a-vis,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, a better process design, or better data, or maybe change in human behavior, right? So how do you really choose where to design and deploy agents? Yeah.
Okay. This is going to probably be my most shocking response today, and it was my biggest surprise. Most employees prefer their own prompts over carefully designed agents. Our number one AI solution, and we have many, the agentic features, it's only being used 6% of the time compared to just chat. So we built a communication agent, for example, sophisticated triggers, best practices, hardly used. People still want to drive, not be the passengers with AI. This taught us to find the genuine pain points, the workflows that are painful even with AI, and we're shifting from process reengineering to zero-based design. So don't build agents for problems people want to solve themselves. Build them for problems people wish would just go away.
Okay. Probably the last question to Peter. Peter, you have, in your vast experience, wanted to ask you this. OKRs are often sold as an execution framework, but in practice, they can really expose deeper structural or operating model problems. How should leaders respond when OKRs reveal that the issue isn't execution at all? Right? It's much more than that.
Well, first off, they've got to be willing to look in the mirror. I think what OKRs do, if you implement them, is they expose a lot of things culturally within your organization, passive-aggressive behaviors where people tell the boss he's great, and then they go out and have a coffee and go, that'll never happen here. So you've got to get a real understanding from where you're getting with your OKRs and start listening as to what that's all about. From my perspective, I think where you can really learn, though, from that is a little bit to John's point about how you use AI. You need to get people involved in coming up with the solutions to get ownership to it. So I tend to turn OKRs, particularly when I'm trying to align, I use problem statements. Because most of the time as leaders, we can describe this absolute perfect situation of nirvana and strategic goals and North Stars, etc. However, we've still got to ask ourselves, why don't we have it now? So if you get the team working on a problem statement, then you can say, what would have to be true in a year's time for that not to be a problem? Now you've got the grounds of something of an OKR that's seated in reality, that it hasn't just been generated by a clever agent. It's got something that people have contributed to. And I think where AI starts to really kick in is, okay, well, what would that look like in terms of exploring what key results might look like? So I put AI in the room during workshops now. Rather than people going back to the desks and pretending to be really clever because they've come up with something and then send out a 400-page report that Claude or ChatGPT has created that nobody reads. So it's about how you integrate your personality as a leader to make sure that people are challenged to do problem solving. And I think once you're getting that coming back to you, that's why I do say that OKRs are a bit of a mirror around organizational health.
Great. Thanks a lot, John and Peter. Very, very insightful responses. And thank you very much for the audience. I know we have maybe a couple of questions unanswered, and Manish deserves answers for all his questions. We'll hopefully reach to you individually, right? Salome also has a question unanswered, but thank you very much for the questions, audience, as well. Thanks, Eli.
That was an amazing session, and I have to say that it was impressive how you landed some macro trends to the day-to-day practical challenges and opportunities of the teams and organizations. So thank you so much for sharing such tangible and actionable insights, John, Peter, and Senthil, for facilitating the conversation. We're going to move on to the next session. We're going to split again per track. So we're going to have 2 case studies again. One from ServiceNow. We're going to explain how they scale the OKR in their organizations. And then one from Monex, which is in a hyper growth and had to find a way to align everyone and maximize the focus and on strategic outcomes. So you can reach these 2 sessions of half an hour, and then we'll get another networking session. I take the opportunity to remind you we are less than 1 hour to go to fill the assessment. We have many answers, and thank everyone for the engagement. We are so looking forward to share the overall result at the end of the maturity overall and the difference per industry and so on. So yeah, 7 minutes, and you will get your own report with some insights and advice. And thank you again, Senthil, Peter, and John. And let's go to the next session. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.